Bloomberg News.
Okay, well, let's welcome our next guest, the always colorful Jim Rogers. He's chairman of Rogers Holdings, and he's right now visiting back in the United States. And I'm sure, Jim, enjoying the holidays at the moment, or the upcoming holidays.
Well, likewise. Merry Christmas. Happy holidays.
Same here, Jim. Okay, I've got to imagine that you're quite pleased with the fact that the Senate rejected the auto bailout bill. You've been against any of these type of rescues.
Well, absolutely. I mean, it's crazy that American taxpayers are going to have to do all of this. You know, Betty, right now there are 40 million Americans who do not have health insurance, but the government was asking them to pay more so that the auto workers could have health insurance. That's just bad economics, and it's horrible morality.
You know, but we did have Jack Bogle on earlier who says he doesn't think GM is going to fail. He thinks, in fact, the government will come in with other options. There's some talk, of course, of using the TARP funds for this.
Betty, it would be good for GM to fail. Then they could renegotiate a lot of bad contracts, clean up a lot of bad mistakes. You know, there's an old expression, what's good for General Motors is good for the country. Well, you know what's good for the country is for General Motors to go bankrupt. It's also good for General Motors. They can clean out the mess and start over.
What kind of failure would you advocate?
What kind of failure?
I mean, some are saying some sort of a prepackaged bankruptcy. Some are talking about all-out liquidation. I mean, what kind of failure do you think would be the best?
There's no reason to liquidate General Motors or Chrysler or any of them, I don't think. No, just to go into regular bankruptcy like every other company in the country that has failed, and let the courts and the creditors sort it out. This is the way the system is supposed to work. Betty, the system is supposed to work that when people get in trouble, the competent take over the assets of the incompetent, and you start over from a stronger base. What has been happening is the government's been taking the assets away from the competent people, giving them to the incompetent people, and saying, all right, now you compete with the competent people. That's not the way that's bad economics and bad morality. It just doesn't work. It never has worked, and it never will. It weakens the whole system.
And what about those, though, Jim, of course, who say that if we see a bankruptcy, a failure of GM or Ford or all three of those, that it's going to be a catastrophe for the U.S. economy. We're going to sink further into recession, and you're going to see millions, more than 2.5 million jobs being lost. And you've already seen over 1 million jobs being lost here in the United States.
Betty, if you keep propping up failure, you're going to have it even worse a year from now, 2 years from now, 3 years from now. You put Band-Aid on a cancer patient, it's a disaster. You go ahead and you take your pain and you sort the system out. America has spent something like, $8 trillion, $10 trillion, the government in the last 6 months, trying to prop everybody up. That's going to lead to the demise of the dollar. It's going to lead to much higher interest rates, much higher inflation, much higher prices. It's going to be a disaster for America.
Jim, do you believe that the United States will continue to have a viable auto industry?
Of course they will. It's not going to be what it was before. But Betty, the only way it's going to be viable is to let the automobile companies sort out their mistakes. They're going to have to change a lot of commitments they made, which were disastrous commitments. They never should have been made in the first place. One reason America cannot compete right now is there's something like $2,000 in each car for previous obligations, which they can now get rid of, and then they could compete. They could compete very well if they didn't have such an artificially high cost structure.
Jim, let me just turn very quickly, because we don't have a lot of time, from the autos to treasuries, because you and I have talked quite a bit about this. You've been short treasuries for quite some time, saying that there's a bubble right now, and we've been talking a lot about that in this program this week, in fact. But the problem is that your scenario of letting banks fail or letting auto companies fail is going to just drive people further and further into treasuries. I mean, is it wise right now to be short treasuries?
Well, no, I covered my treasuries a couple of weeks ago because they were going against me, but I'm waiting to short them again. It is a bubble. Bernanke's been saying for years that he would buy long-term government bonds. I could not believe that anybody would be so idiotic, but he's that idiotic. He is now buying, or says he's buying, long-term government bonds. So that's why they're going up. In the end, it's the last bubble left, Betty. I cannot imagine why anybody would give money in U.S. dollars to the U.S. government for 30 years to have 3 or 4% or 2 or 3%. It is insane, but that's what bubbles are.
Okay, Jim, we've run out of time, but always nice to see you, of course, or to hear from you, and take care of yourself. Jim Rogers, chairman of Rogers Holdings.
Hear more Bloomberg News reports on the Bloomberg Terminal at AV Go, on Bloomberg Television, and on Bloomberg Radio. Copyright Bloomberg LP.